Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Dr. Jessica Lautz, and I'm with the National Association of Realtors. We have actually been doing research on student loan debt all the way back to 2013. Some of the big reasons why are that our members are actually at the peak age where they actually do have children in college. But they also started to understand that homebuyers were having a very difficult time entering the home buying market, and especially first-time home buyers. Today, we know that inventory and the affordability crisis are very much impacting first-time home buyers, but there's something else afoot as well, and that's student loan debt. Over the time period of 2013 and on, we know that student loan debt has increased dramatically in the US economy. And so we want to understand the repercussions of that to potential home buyers, to the economy, and how these folks are faring with the student loan debt. So the latest results that we have done are actually just released last week. They're hot off the presses, and it actually looks at 2,000 adults who have student loan debt or have just paid off their student loan debt in the last 2 years. They could be holding it for themselves. They could be holding it for a dependent or a spouse, but they are saddled with a debt. So let's jump in and look at their experiences. The first thing that we wanted to know is, how has the stimulus package, has the pandemic really helped to pay off student loan debt? Unfortunately, we didn't necessarily get the answer that we had hoped for. What we do see is that 38% of folks, the pandemic did help them pay down student loan debt. But for half of folks, more than half of folks, it actually didn't help. We know that the 0% interest loan on federal student loan debt did help some people actually get ahead of their monthly payments. They were able to pay down more to their principal, and that did help them get ahead on their student loan debt. We also know everyone really has cut spending on entertainment, restaurants, going to sporting events and concerts. And so that diverted funding also has helped a portion of people actually get ahead of their student loan debt. The third way that we have seen, I think, is pretty interesting. People have changed their living environment in the last year. Maybe that means that they went home to live with parents and so they could get ahead of their debt, or that actually means they moved to a more affordable location, which we know a lot of people have done in the last year. And so they were able to get ahead of their debt as well. So there is some encouraging signs here that the pandemic did help some borrowers, but it wasn't the overwhelming positive that we really had hoped for when we sent out the survey. The next thing that we wanted to understand is, what are people's knowledge of student loan debt when we think about financial literacy going into the student loan debt process? When we think about people who are starting college, do they know what they're getting into? And then do they know what their potential earnings are? And we really dove in here because this is something that's incredibly important to us, is really understanding financial literacy. When we look at this, what we saw is that on the positive, about 65% of folks did say that, yes, I have at least somewhat of an understanding of what my costs are going, or what my potential earnings are going to be. On the flip side, about 40% knew minimal about the cost of college. So while they could say, yes, I'm going to have a good solid salary once I exit college, they didn't necessarily know what they were getting themselves into when they actually looked at the cost. And that's, I think, the unfortunate part. One of the things that I think is incredibly important here is looking at potential earnings and what people are doing once they graduate college. So you have choices, of course, in the job market. And right now, it's very hard for employers to actually get solid employees who aren't necessarily going to ghost them. So what we have seen is that for people who have student loan debt, actually the majority have chosen employment decisions that are not necessarily in their career field that they studied college for. Perhaps they're taking on a second career, a second job to pay down this debt, or they're just in an uninteresting job to really help them tackle this debt. That's a very high share of individuals. Unfortunately, this jumps considerably when we look at men who have student loan debt, all the way up to 7 in 10. And it's even higher for Hispanic borrowers and for Black African American borrowers, also jumping up to 7 in 10. So these individuals are making choices that are outside of what they studied for, or just in an uninteresting job. One of the questions that we did ask is kind of a make-believe question of, what if your employer was able to give you a benefit where you could pay down your student loan debt a little bit faster? And in that make-believe scenario, what we did see is that 59% of student loan debt borrowers would actually consider changing their employment if their employer did offer this. Now, so for those companies out there who are really struggling to actually find good, solid employees, this could be definitely a benefit that would be positive for these student loan borrowers. I think this is definitely something that companies may want to look at, because in this make-believe scenario, this could be some good, solid employees that you could gain here. The next thing that we wanted to know is about long-term savings. And what we found here is a little bit discouraging. We asked a mix of scenarios about contributing to your 401k or retirement plan. And what we found here is a little over a quarter contribute what they want when they want. That is positive. That is very good. However, a little over a quarter are not able to contribute at all to their retirement fund. And so that becomes pretty discouraging. The rest of folks are in a scenario where either they're contributing a little bit less than they want to, or they have to take breaks from contributing to their 401k or to their retirement plan, and maybe not necessarily the funds that they would like to be able to contribute. And the reason, of course, is because student loan debt is holding them back from really contributing and from saving for their retirement. The next thing that I think is really important to understand is emergency savings. I mean, this comes up every day in our daily lives as we think about things that could go wrong. Maybe that's the blown tire on the side of the highway, your brakes go out, anything along these lines, the what happens fund. And so we wanted to understand how student loan debt is holding that back as well. What we did find is that unfortunately, 40% of student loan debt borrowers that we surveyed don't have an emergency savings fund of even $500. Now, I will say on the flip side, that means that 60%, the majority do. Some of them even have a good savings account that they feel solid with, that if life happens, they'll be okay. But this is a large share of individuals who do not have $500 even saved. So the next questions that I'm going to go into do look at homeownership, and it looks at where people are living right now and what their living situation is. So jumping into that data, we wanted to understand headship rates before we get into homeownership. This becomes really important because if you're not able to move out, perhaps from your parents' house or your family member's house, homeownership is going to be a ways off as well. When we look at the economy today, what we know is that even renters are facing higher prices. And so this is a difficult environment right now for folks to be able to enter into the rental market, let alone the home buying market. But what we did find when we surveyed individuals with student loan debt is that 46% of those individuals did delay moving out of a family member's home. So looking at that headship rate, it's going to be lower for individuals with student loan debt. It's not surprising that it's the highest for Gen Zers. Gen Zers are in their 20s. That is a popular time to stay at home, to double up, to be able to really cut funds on paying for rent. And perhaps that's a more secure way to do that than finding a roommate and an apartment on your own. What I think becomes pretty striking, though, is when we look at the millennial share. It's all the way up to 62%. And it's a good reminder that millennials range from their mid-20s all the way up to the age of 40 now. So that's going to get a little uncomfortable if you're still living with your folks all the way up to there. When we look at Gen Xers, we can see that that share is just 37%. And this is if it delayed when you graduated college. So we know that Gen Xers likely graduated quite a while ago, and we can see just the difference in those shares. When we look at boomers and so on, the share drops even further. The other thing that we can see here are there's some pretty big differences by race. White individuals who graduated from college are less likely to have had to live at home for a longer period of time, while we see that Hispanic and Black individuals who have student loan debt were more likely to have stayed at home for a longer period of time. And we ended up collecting data on this, and that period of time ranges anywhere from less than 6 months, which is pretty short, to all the way up to 8 years. So there is a very considerable range here for what individuals are facing. The next thing that we wanted to get into is the homeownership rate. Now, before I jump into that, I will say home buyers today, potential home buyers, first-time home buyers, are in a very unique environment. There are a lot of all cash buyers. Nearly a quarter of home buyers today are all cash home buyers. And there's a lot of folks today who have a lot of money, who were able to waive home inspections or waive appraisals, purchase sight unseen. It's a very unique market, and individuals are purchasing vacation homes, investment homes at higher rates than we have seen in past years. That becomes direct competition for first-time home buyers. But we know that student loan debt is playing a big role. And so we wanted to look at how big of a role is that playing today. And when we look at this data, what we see is that unfortunately, more than half of non-owners who don't own a home today are saying that student loan debt is delaying them from purchasing a home. This rises all the way to 60% for millennials. And I think one of the arguments that we often hear here is that student loan debt is going to give you higher earnings. You'll be able to pay down that debt and you'll be able to purchase a home when you want to. But unfortunately, we see the highest share of student loan debt holders who cannot purchase a home actually make $100,000 or more. So they want to purchase a home. They are considering purchasing a home, but 60% of them are saying, I can't because of my student loan debt. We did want to dig into this, and we wanted to understand the whys behind this as well. And perhaps not surprisingly, what we found is that people who have student loan debt don't feel they can save for their down payment. They don't think that they can qualify because of their debt to income ratio. They just don't feel financially secure. And we do see that this is impacting them. So I am on my last slide right now. That is my time. I have to thank you so much for having me today. Truly, I think this is an incredibly important report, and I want to encourage you to really dig in. It is very lengthy, and I really did just skim the surface, but please do check it out. I will end on this. NAR has a number of policy positions on student loan debt, and this is something that has been a very strong position from our members who actually voted on this in our board of directors meeting. And they want to encourage the financial education, the financial literacy, improve opportunities to refinance student loan debt, support businesses to help pay off their employees' student loan debt through tax deductions, and then lastly, support the elimination of taxes for borrowers who actually do have their debt forgiven by their employer. Thank you so much for having me. Please do check out the full report, and you can grab it at that link. Thank you.